Hey guys, and welcome to a pretty different video to the stuff we normally do here on the channel. We are a Total War themed channel, but I'm going to be doing something a teeny weeny little bit different, and that's reacting to some history videos. I thought it'd be kind of fun to start doing these type of videos, considering I play a game originally based in strategy, although moving towards fantasy, involving battle tactics and all that good stuff. So I wanted to hop in, have a little look at the Punic Wars, Genghis Khan, all that kind of crazy stuff, because there's so much cool content out there. And but today we're going to be looking at World War II, which may seem like a strange place to start, because for the most part, all the games I play tend to be in the fantasy realm, which is more obviously based in kind of medieval combat or ancient combat. But I thought World War II pretty easily accessible to everyone, the largest ever kind of conflict of man that has ever existed, so it seems like a reasonable place to start, and the guys at Oversimplified seem to put together a pretty cool video. It's certainly very popular. This is part one, and it's about 13 minutes long. We're going to be pausing here and there to give my own thoughts on stuff. I do obviously have a knowledge of World War II anyway, being British. We've learnt mainly about kind of the British front, France, Belgium, and the intervention of America and that kind of stuff, but surprising amounts of history are just avoided when you're kind of going through school and learning different stuff. I suppose there's only so much they can teach you, but I know very little about the Russian front in comparison to the rest of kind of the war, as well as some of the battles in Africa and all that kind of cool stuff. So hopefully these guys delve into it. It is called Oversimplified, so I'm assuming it's going to be quite nice, simple, concise, and we're going to pop in here and see what these guys have to say. So before we get started though, if you do by the end of this video enjoy what you see, make sure to subscribe, like, all that good standard YouTubey stuff. You guys know what to do. If you want to see me react to more of this stuff, comment down below to say that you like the video and all that kind of good stuff, but also give me suggestions of what to look for in the future. We, of course, will be doing part 2 first, but then I'll be moving on to other stuff. Certainly looking to get in towards the ancient warfare and the medieval warfare and all that good stuff. Sorry that I look absolutely pale as a ghost. I have a really powerful lamp next to me, but otherwise my room is quite dark, so unfortunately you're going to have to deal with me. But anyway, let's have a little start here and get into this.
This video was made possible by Skillshare. Churchill was a man with many talents. He was an artist, a butterfly enthusiast, and he had an unpublished manuscript about aliens. Clearly, he was a man with an insatiable thirst for knowledge.
I did not know all this.
Maybe he could have loaded up his computer and logged onto Skillshare.
Oh, it's okay.
With more than
the advert. We let them play the advert. These
design,
guys
business, technology, and more. Perhaps he was considering a
that's
career
real,
in fashion, but didn't know where to start. On Skillshare, he would find courses in fashion design and garment construction.
Oh, hell yeah.
Or if he wanted to learn app design, improve his photography, or just how to make a really good quesadilla, he would have found courses for all of these and more.
Overpower me too much.
Skillshare gives you access to high
Skillshare is apparently really good. Skillshare, if you're watching, you know what to do. You know what to do. I'm not sponsored, but I would like to.
I was blown away by the number of really useful courses available to me, like this class.
So, yeah, as I said before, the most important stuff I'm looking forward to is kind of the Russian front. I know that's where the majority of the battle is. And before we actually get fully started, I'll wait for the Skillshare thing to kind of play out here.
Viewers.
I've got a question for you guys to answer. So do you think it was possible for Germany to win the war in the first place? Because from my knowledge of the way the war went, Germany did kind of above expectations of where they realistically should have got to, due to multiple things. A lot of not wanting to get back into conflict, right? You got to remember World War I just happened not too long before this, and no one wanted to go back into such a global event before. They're like, all right, we've done the World War, we ain't doing that again. But of course, the hand was kind of forced. But from what I know, Germany just didn't have the resources. I wonder if they're going to go into that. If it was even possible. I just don't think they had the manpower to realistically take down Russia even. I think Russia would give them huge problems, particularly with how well trained the British were as well, and just the number of allies that were kind of stacking against them. But here we go. Cool. Looks like we are.
A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service.
We're going to hear a lot about him.
He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid
Can't imagine Mussolini as a teacher.
Abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted. and got arrested.
That's
Then
pretty
World War I
interesting,
came
actually,
along,
that he
and
was
once again,
anti-war.
He protested Italy's involvement.
We'll
But then
see how
thought,
far he
wait a minute,
switches.
this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere.
Okay, so this
And
is the
suddenly
turning
he
point.
was pro-war, but his
Yeah.
fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based
We're
on
going to
class
see this a little bit
divisions.
later as well. Sorry for pausing. I'm going to be pausing throughout to give my thoughts. We're going to see this a little later with Hitler as well, with his, like, how do you get to the point of someone wanting war so badly that they're creating their own political parties and so forth? And Hitler's obviously very influenced by the First World War and his experiences there. And also, the Allies kind of really screwed over Germany with some pacts, which I'm sure we're going to be getting into a little bit later. Of course, Germany kind of started the war, so you're like, I mean, is it deserved or not? But it almost forced, World War II was almost inevitably going to happen because of the events of the aftermath of World War I. But it's interesting to see Mussolini kind of this anti-war patriot, right? And he switches around quite quickly when he realizes his ideals may align, which is
tearing us
scary,
apart, but based on
scary
unity
when you
through
think about it a little
nationality.
bit.
We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples, just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call
So he
it
wants the
fascismo,
empire
and
back.
it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
Oh, the famous baldness. These guys are pretty funny, actually, putting this together. It seems quite cool. World War II. Here we go.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they
Don't
were going to
forget
get a
that.
lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he
all
went
it
to the
takes
king and said,
is
"Make me
one or
prime
two
minister,
idiots
or I'll make me prime minister."
promising the
And king
world
said,
and,
"You and what army?"
People
This
will follow
army.
suit.
Fair enough. Then he went about
Yeah, of
establishing
course.
a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on
This
the
is the big
loser
one.
side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory.
Yeah, this is what
had to demilitarize the Rhineland,
kind of
had to
talking
reduce their
about.
army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to
Yeah.
pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you
Okay,
understand how
okay.
all of this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a
Yeah,
small
so again, we're seeing, even though Italy were kind of the winner side, they were kind of the small brother, so they got the worst piece of the pie, far less than they thought they were going to get. So they feel a little bit cheated. Germany definitely feel heavily punished from losing the First War, and the big thing you can see with both these nations is their economy sucks. They're both in massive debt, particularly Germany, who have to pay back something that is physically impossible. They can't pay it back. It's too much money for them. And what do? When you need money, you go get money. And the war is a huge money vacuum. You lose a lot of money, of course, because you need to invest in weapons and so forth. But there's a ridiculous amount of profit to be made as well. And it's America as well, before they fully committed to the fight, were selling weapons. Mainly just to the Allies, I believe, which is an interesting debate as well we might have when we get to that point of, is that already committing yourself? Were they kind of committed earlier? Or, I don't know, maybe they were selling weapons as well to some of the Axis nations as well. We'll see when we get to that point. But yeah, debt is a big factor in war, or at least starting wars.
angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it.
Just
Hitler
like
had
the
been a soldier
Mussolini
during World War I,
situation.
and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attended a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew.
Germany
and
didn't
grew,
mess
and in
around as much there as
1933, the
Italy
president
did.
made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number
Yeah,
two.
those two
Hitler
stories
and
are
Mussolini had
parallel
a lot of the
quite
same
nicely.
ideas, but more importantly,
Ooh.
they had the same enemies, and they started
How's that? Let's go back a couple of seconds.
Germany's great destined savior.
See
and
what
he
they,
went full
listed out
megalomaniac,
there.
establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot
So
of
this
the
is
same
looking at fascism and socialism. And yeah, basically, like, they make perfect allies, right? They're both gunning for the exact same stuff. Radical nationalism, both being extremely racist, anti-socialist, anti-democratic, lots of violence and militarism. Yeah, so they both want to expand, feel hard done by, want to get
ideas, but
revenge.
more importantly, they had the same enemies,
it's
and
gonna
they
start
started to
causing
get along.
problems.
Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good?
They're doing their own thing.
Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had
again
no
a
natural
third
resources,
economy
so they
that
decided
is
to go
screwed.
get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't
So, of course, being British
okay, see ya.
and learning about history, you kind of consider yourselves to be the good guys, right? And though I would argue, obviously, in World War II, I think that is a very good argument to be made that, for the most part, the Allies were the good guys. They were kind of trying to stop a lot of really horrible and horrific events that go along, that both Germany and Japan committed as well. They did some pretty crazy stuff. But again, coming back to this point, just feeling hard done by. We've got no economy. America came over here, kind of screwed us up a little bit, and we need resources and money, but the Allies aren't going to allow that.
Screw this.
They want
They went
everything
to
for
war with
themselves.
Russia and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed
Russia have
Korea,
lost
but they
some
didn't
really
stop
weird
there.
wars
In
before.
World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving
this is
them
quite
an
a famous
excuse to
situation.
launch an invasion and take over. So here's
Very
the
clever,
situation.
though.
Nazi Germany, fascist Italy,
Faking an
and
attack,
Japan
so
all believe they're
you have an
racially
excuse to
superior,
go
all
after
feel
them.
hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to
so this is
take
kind
over
of getting
the
into what we
world.
were talking about
But for now,
earlier
a
of
good
Germany
portion of
needing
Europe
to
would do, and he
expand,
began
because I
lining
just
up
don't
his
think they had
neighbors.
enough
The Allies finally started
resources,
to get worried, so
troops.
they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, I want that thing, and the Allies would say, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat. In 1938,
So-
Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom,
We'll get into
this
this
is
in just a
Germany
second,
now.
actually.
Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, look, we're going to give you...
So the Allies didn't get a bad rep here. Okay, so they're kind of giving away a lot of land and letting Germany kind of get little crumbs, right? So they're getting more and more, and that's only going to encourage them realistically. But you've got to remember, as we spoke about at the start of the video, this is just after World War One, and no one wants to go back. It's a horrendous style of warfare they went for, like this huge grind of all the trenches. So the appeasement, though in hindsight, kind of looking at the situation, we know Hitler's not going to back down, but it's kind of understandable to a point that of why they did it. So I understand the rationale. I'm not saying it was a good idea, not saying it's right either, because a lot of the land they're giving away, of course, wants to be free, and they're kind of giving it to Germany at the moment and Italy. But I understand the logic of why they were doing it, though I still disagree with the decision. Although I have, of course, the bonus of having some hindsight here.
Hang
seeing
on,
how the
this
war
meeting is
pans
about
out.
my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too? Anyway, we're going to give you what you want.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned
Ned
victorious,
Stark,
waving
the
a signed piece of
paper
in
shall
the air,
protect me
declaring
moment.
crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace. And we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor. And every day on the 30th of September, we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, didn't see
What?
that coming.
He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler.
Yeah.
Not to be outdone,
Pretty
Mussolini
much.
also wanted to get in
Pretty
on the
much.
action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the
Controlling
Japanese,
seas is very
gunfire was
important.
exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their
obviously this is oversimplified, so they're kind of glossing over a lot of stuff very quickly, which is cool. I don't know too much actually about the Japanese warfare and the Russian warfare, or at least not as much before. But yeah, there was some real horrible war crimes committed by the Japanese when they did go into China. I don't know if I can say the name of what it was dubbed basically here on YouTube without getting demonetized, but yeah, they did pretty horrible stuff to the capital city, and it was very brutal, and I think that kind of stuff gets glossed over a little bit because of later events in World War II, and again, because I'm on the British side of things, right, from what I've learned at school and all that kind of stuff and through college, that, again, it kind of gets left behind, but it's good to remember that this World War II, though we kind of get these isolated pockets, right, which we learn about, it was a global event, of course. There was fighting all over the world in Africa. Scandinavia was fighting, and it's good to try and get a bigger grasp of just how large World War II was. And France and Britain, I believe at this point, were still basically empires. I don't think they were calling themselves that at the time, but they all owned bits of land dotted all over the place. They haven't quite crumbled away yet. And those elements can come into play as well. You can drag resources for them and attack your opponent from different angles as well. I believe Britain even went at one point to try and go through Greece and kind of attack from the south before that, I think, stalled. I'm not quite sure what happened with that. Hopefully they'll go over it. But yeah, the Japanese very clever with the... Most, I think, historians agree that it was probably faked, these attacks from China onto Japan, like the train we saw earlier, as an excuse to invade enemy territory and kind of as a rationale. And because people didn't want war, it was like, okay, well, you know, we might not agree with this, but I guess they attacked you first. We're not going to look too deeply. Which is
relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel.
That's what it is.
Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, "How about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future." Sounds good.
I did not know about all of this. About the treaty? I know... Did I know about the treaty? I mean, we know how that's going to turn out. Not very good for anyone concerned. Let's just skip that out
this
there.
New line stunned the West. On the 1st of September, 1939,
the fact Russia backed
German
down
troops entered
so
Poland,
much.
and Britain and France declared war on Germany.
Of course.
The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't
very good
really
at
moved
World
on
War I.
from it.
With
They
Belgium.
still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio. Orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected.
Do drills
They
and
built a line
stuff.
of
Yeah,
defenses
they
along
are
their German
not
border,
prepared
but
for
didn't
World
bother
War II.
extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that
Again,
the war
it's
could be
coming
ended
down to
diplomatically.
the
Instead
horrors of
bombing
the
raids,
First
the RAF
War.
dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War.
If anything as well, kind of dropping pants. Hey guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. Had to take something out of the oven rather urgently there. And I can't remember what I was talking about. I think it was pamphlets all round. We just got to the point where they talked about dropping pamphlets over Germany, Berlin and other such countries. And yeah, overall, if your opponent starts showing you pamphlets of like war propaganda as a whole, it's kind of a show of weakness, I think, and it may have even egged on the German people to, hey, look, you know, these guys, they're not ready for a war, they don't want a war, and that only, you know, inspires them more that, hey, maybe we can actually win this. The war probably would have happened either way, but I'm just saying it's kind of a lack of show of strength, which I think the Allies have kind of been showing quite a lot by this point. We've seen them appeasing, I spoke about that earlier in this video, and kind of giving Germany like little bits here and there. Now the pamphlets on top of that, it's not looking good for the Allies this early on, and it's all building up. I'm sure we're going to get to the actual start of the war in just a second. So let's carry on here.
And so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they
Good
turned
idea
their
as
eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to
Norway.
Germany through neutral Norway. So the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but
The
this
lads.
request was refused. Then the Soviet Union attacked Finland.
Well, yeah,
so the
ask
Allies
them to
said,
stop trade.
how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your airfields. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters
Understandably.
around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion.
Yeah, that
through
kind of
Denmark
backfired
into
for
Norway. The Allies rushed
the
to land
Scandinavian
troops
countries
along the
there.
coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly
There's a
embarrassing
really cool story as well. Maybe some point we'll go over of I believe it's Norwegian, not Danish. I think it's a Norwegian captain, kind of like this old retired man. And they really didn't want the war. They weren't prepared for war. And they definitely didn't have the equipment to deal with Germany. But when Germany came, they reached out to this man, like, hey, you're the only guy who can lead us right now. And he pits up this, like, heroic fight to try and hold them back in a bay, I believe. And he's got these old, like, antique guns, and he's, like, popping shots and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But maybe we'll delve into that.
Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had
The
a
big boys
slightly
here.
different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy: attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union
Which is clever,
and win
right?
the war. During the phony war, the Allies had given Hitler time.
You
to
don't
prepare
want to
his
fight war on
forces.
multiple fronts.
Now,
It
he was
never goes
ready
well.
to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused. And in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had
The
a
long
trick up
grind,
his sleeve.
yeah?
Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the
That
Ardennes,
is
an area
super
full of
dark,
hills
but
and
super
forests,
smart.
pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning.
So again here, we're going to see this encirclement, which is a real common tactic done throughout the world wars, but also in general. Surrounding armies has always been very profitable. Look at the Battle of Cannae, for example, but this is on a global scale rather than just surrounding one army facing one army and surrounding each other. This is like multiple armies being used to surround. It's this huge encirclement, and it's just death because it cuts you off from your allies, cuts you off from your resources. You can starve to death. It's a very brutal style of warfare. Now, the most interesting takeaway from this part of the war for me personally is, speaking of Hannibal and talking about the Battle of Cannae, the most important thing, or one of the most important things in warfare is being able to move an army. An army is a huge, sprawling mess a lot of the time. And though we've got to World War II here, where it's a little bit easier because we have mobility, we have vehicles and so forth, you're dealing with way more men than we've ever seen previously. So it's really hard to pull off these huge movements that Germany are currently doing right now. And striking your opponent where they think they cannot be hurt. Here it's the Ardennes forest, right? It's a natural fortification, France are thinking. Only a madman would push straight through that. And if we look back at history, there is multiple cases of this situation happening. The Carthaginians went over the Alps, struck Rome where they didn't expect it, to devastating effect, and pulled off a similar tactic as well, actually going through some swamps and doing all this kind of horrible, nasty business dealing in the swamps. But popping up unexpected, catching your opponent off guard, and having your troops positioned in the advantageous position. It doesn't matter if you're outnumbered, doesn't even matter necessarily if you're outskilled. Those things are very useful, but positioning is arguably the most important thing in war. Well, winning's the most important thing, but it's one of the kind of the top 5, I would say, important things to do. Is you need resources, food, weaponry, so forth. Numbers are incredibly important as well. You know, if you're one really skilled man and you're positioned rather well, you can't deal with an army of 20,000. But movement is certainly up there as well.
Speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France.
It's going to be Dunkirk, I think.
Nearly wiping out the British too, but they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey.
Those civilians are
With
truly
French forces depleted,
brave
the Germans
people.
breezed through,
Not
taking
built for
Paris
war, but
and France
putting
fell.
their lives
The
on the line to go
Germans
there
couldn't
and
do in World
do
War
that.
I. Hitler had done just like.
So much quicker as well. The First War was such a grind, and the Blitzkrieg tactic, devised by Hitler and his commanding officers there, just took out France instantly. Think how tough France were in that first war and how hard they were to break down. These guys kind of touched on it earlier. Not only did France really not want war, but they were not prepared for war. Lack of equipment, not updating to the times and keeping their military going, really put them off guard, and the sudden attack, particularly that kind of punch right in the stomach, that gut punch of hitting them where they didn't expect it, just took them out so quickly. And if you take out capital cities, for most countries, not all countries, they're basically over. That's their head of communication and where everything's been dealt with. It'd probably be a little bit different in current warfare if this happened. I don't think another world war is possible without nuclear warfare, which is something we obviously don't want to happen. But you take out Paris, you take out France, and that's what they managed to do. And I'm sure he's going to try the same thing as well with Moscow.
Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't.
That's, yeah, a little bit stubborn of a country,
force them into submission,
which is good and bad.
Games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next,
it's looking very bad right now.
France,
UK versus the
coastal
world.
areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also thought the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of
yeah, that's the... Yeah, it was. It's the middle finger, and that really was the entire Churchill approach, right? Is like, up to this point, we've given too much away, so we're going to let nothing stand whatsoever. If you attack us, we're going to hit you back. We don't care anymore. It's got to that point where, obviously, war's on the cards. I mean, it's currently happening, and yes, Britain is alone, but it needs to send a message, that message of strength, and hopefully that will inspire, you know, as we can see, French resistance fighters, but other countries to get involved as well. I'm sure Britain, certainly hoping America, their old pals there, will pop in to their assistance, and maybe inspire the Russians as well, maybe to help fight back. But rather interestingly, they kind of touched down the African colonies, and will the African colonies actually fall in line, right? France taken out, but the people in these colonies still may consider themselves French and not this kind of false puppet kingdom, which is something nations have done all across history. Forming puppet kingdoms can try to kind of gives you a bit of legitimacy and tries to keep the peace a tiny bit so you don't get so much resistance, right, from the French civilians. The Vikings were famous for doing this in England as well, conquering a kingdom, putting a puppet king in charge, letting him run the kingdom for a little while, and after a few years when people got used to the Danish rule there, just, you know, get rid of him, take him out back and have him fall down a well or something.
Troops could land on British soil. He would first need air and naval superiority across the channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British Invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much.
Again, that middle finger approach.
And he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside, away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the...
It's very strange, this like British approach to war. Britain's country has just changed a lot over the years as well, and it's still a very stubborn country, but maybe not quite so much in the good way that this kind of, you know, stubborn happened, and people were relatively calm, it seems. We learned quite a lot about this part of history. I've actually met some people who I believe were kids in World War II when I was at school. We interviewed them at history and stuff, and they spoke about it they just got on with it. It was life for them at this point. They told me a really, really funny story, actually, of going to the shop with the entire front glass window just shattered and gone, and they're just sweeping up the glass like, yeah, come in, we're still open, which is absolutely insane when you think about it.
Just a foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be
air superiority is key here, because you cannot do a land invasion via boats if you don't have air superiority. So that looks like it's the end of part 1 there. That was some really, really good stuff. We'll quickly touch on that again. So, even if Germany take out the air force here, attacking an island is incredibly difficult. That's so tough. Yes, you can land your boats now due to the fact you have that air support and maybe take out the British Navy at the same time, though the British Navy, of course, very famous and not to be taken kind of underestimated in any degree despite the lack of air. But they certainly wouldn't want to engage the Germans when the Germans have that air superiority. But you still have to then get to the beaches and fight your way through all of Britain, which is a grueling, disgusting task to do. So could Germany have done it? Maybe. Who knows? We'll never find out, of course, because they have to abandon those plans after losing the air game and kind of giving that towards Britain. And I believe this point where they're going to turn their sights to Russia. Okay, we've taken out France. Really want to take out the UK because we spoke about earlier being surrounded in war is a horrific situation, very dire that you find yourself in because you're spreading your resources far thinner than your opponents are doing, and you get a little bit claustrophobic and trapped up there into kind of killing pits and all that nasty stuff. So I guess if you fail to knock out Britain, what can you do then? Well, you can turn back around and try to knock out Russia, which is going to be interesting to kind of learn about that warfare, particularly as well. It seems like they are going to be touching a little bit more on the colonies and going into that, which I'm very excited to be learning about. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was pretty cool. I must admit, I really enjoyed it. They did quite a good little bit of humour there as well into the mix, and it's very simplified, of course, as Oversimplified would state, but they're hitting all the key points, and it's engaging. I like the animation as well quite a bit. Very simple, but very fun. So what did you guys think of this video? Again, if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more of it, remember to like, subscribe, and comment down below to let me know you'd like to see this stuff in the future. I've also got links to Patreon, Discord, and all that kind of standard YouTubey stuff down below in the description. Yeah, that's it from me. I've been a Rubber Duck of War. Until next time, peace, peace. And as always, stay awesome.